Hey everyone, today I'm showing you how I made this retro sun design. Also, you can grab this file on Gumroad for a few bucks if you want to check it out. I have a few things for sale over there, like my glitch effect, but I've also been putting free wallpapers over there too. Links are always in the description. Okay, let's get started. So I'm in Blender 2.83 for this. We're just going to start off with a plane. I'm going to rotate it on the X by 90 degrees. And if we press 0, I just want our camera to be looking straight at it like this. So I'm just going to scale it up so it's fitting our screen a little better. And then we're just going to go into the shading tab over here. Okay, so I'm just going to switch into render view over here, and I'm using EV for this just so it's a little faster. And I'm just going to look through my camera. And then you just want to add a material over here. I'm going to press A to focus on it and period to zoom in. And we're not going to use the principled BSDF for this, so I'm going to delete that and add in a mix shader and plug that in, and also an emission shader and a transparent BSDF right here, and just plug those in. And then this should control the transparency, but if we switch into look dev, so we have the background, you can see that it's not actually turning transparent. And so I'm just going to open up the side panel with N and go to options and turn blend mode from opaque to alpha blend, and that should allow for transparency. I'm also going to change shadow mode from opaque to none, just so there's no shadows. So now we can see it will actually turn completely transparent if we push it all the way. And so to get started, I'm just going to add a texture coordinate. And for this, we're going to be using two of these. We're going to be using the UV, and that's because the origin is over here in the bottom left. And we're going to be using object where the origin is in the center. And that's pretty much the only difference between these when you're using a default plane. So I'm going to add a vector math node, and that's going to be set to length. And basically what length does, if we preview that, is it looks at the origin and tells you how far away everything is from the origin. So the center should be 0 or black because, the very center would be 0 units or 0 meters away from the origin, where in the edge, because the default plane is 2 meters in either direction, the very edge right here should be a value of 1. And if we switch this to UV, we'll see that it's coming from the corner instead. So for this one, we are going to use the object coordinates because we want a circle coming from the center. So then I'm just going to add a math node, and I'm going to set that to greater than and hook that up right here. This is at 0.5 right now, so it's saying anything that is greater than 0.5 make white, and we know that our distance from the center to the edge should be a value of 1, and so if we change this to 1, we should get a circle that reaches the edges perfectly. And then when we plug this into the factor here and view that, we can see that it just looks like a perfect circle now. All right, next we're going to work on the waves. We're basically just going to use a wave texture for this one. And for this, I'm going to use UV coordinates. And I'm just going to change this from X to Y. And then I'm also going to steal this greater than up here, just duplicate it and put it in the front. And if we set this to 0.5, it should be black and white stripes of even width. So basically what we want to do is take our circle and subtract these from it. But right now our circle is black. So I'm just going to make that white by changing this to less than. And then I'm going to add another math node. We're going to set this to subtract. I'm going to plug that in here, preview it, and then I'm just going to subtract our stripes from our circle, and we should get this. Now we just have to check through our mix shader to make sure everything's right, and it doesn't look like it is. We need to clamp this. And also it looks like we need to swap these shaders around, and that should be fine. Once again, if we look through look dev, you can see that it's transparent, and you should be able to adjust the scale with the scale of the wave texture right here. So if you want, this could be your final result, but I want to go a little further. And as you can see, because we're using UV, it's scaling from the bottom, whereas if you used the object texture coordinates, it would scale from the center like that. So keep that in mind when you're making your own version. So what I want to do is be able to make these bars different widths too. So the way we're going to do that is by duplicating this length node right here. And I'm going to use the UV coordinate for this. And I'm just going to preview that. And I want this to be black along the bottom and white along the top and just be like a linear gradient. So I'm just going to add a mapping node. What you want to do is change the value of this X scale to be 0, and that should just stretch it across like that. We're going to use this to distort our wave texture right here. So for this, I am actually going to turn the scale down to about 1, and this will give us a little more control later. It's the only reason I'm doing it. I'm also going to connect these right here. So this is our UV, and this is our object. And I'm also going to add another mapping node right here, and just select that and press backspace to clear the scale so it's back to normal. And so basically what we're going to do here is change our scale, our Y scale right here, to be this texture. So basically what it's doing is this point right here, which is 0, it won't be distorting it at all. And the point up here, which I believe would be 2, this is 2 meters wide by default, so the center should be a value of 1, and up here should be a value of 2. So basically at here it will be distorting it by 2. So when we plug this directly into here and then view this, we can see that it's actually scaling it a little differently. And to give us a little more control, I'm going to add a math texture. I'm going to set this to multiply add. So right now, if we want it to not be distorted at all, we would set the multiplier to 0 and the add, which is controlling the scale, to 1. So this right now, it would be the scale of everything would be 1. So if we wanted to scale this up normally, we would just change this value, this add value. And if we wanted to change the distortion, we change the multiply value right here. And once again, make sure you use the UV coordinates for this, otherwise it will scale from, it'll distort from the center, which you could also achieve by just moving this to -1. And now it's distorting from the center. Or if you wanted it to be upside down, you can just change this to -2, and now it's upside down. But you'll notice that when you try to rotate this around, it doesn't really move, and that's because the scale is set to 0. So if you do want to rotate this at all, just add another mapping node right there and change this back to 1 so it's normal. And now you should be able to rotate it just fine on whatever axis you want. So this is our result right now. We have right here. I'm going to leave this at 4 for now. Okay, so now we have this part, which is our distortion, this part, which is our waves, and this part, which is just our circle shape. We're actually going to be distorting this greater than value, which gives us a pretty interesting result. And to get that started, we're basically just going to duplicate this whole thing that we made for our distortion, and we're just going to be reusing it. So I'm going to grab, again, our UV over here and plug that in. And I'm going to set this back to not be distorting. So I'm going to set the multiply to 0 and the add to 4. So we just have evenly spaced lines right here. I'm going to do the same over here, just so we have no distortion when we plug it in. And I'm going to set this to 0.5 because that's what our greater than is set to right now. And I'm just going to plug it in. And so we should see that there is no difference right now, but we can control the greater than now with this add. And if we set this to 0 and turn the multiplier up, we can see that the thickness is greater at the top. And I think this is actually a cooler result, but I think it's also cool to have an option to mix and match these. So to try to explain what's going on here a little better, basically this one right here is taking the entire wave texture and distorting it, whereas if you look at this, the center of each wave is still evenly spaced, and it's basically just using the greater than to say how far away from the center should I go, basically. So if we do distort this up a little higher and turn this to 0, the center of each wave should still be evenly spaced, and it's just that the white is going further from the center, if that makes any sense. And this kind of creates more of like a halftone pattern that you would see in like printing and stuff like that. Okay, so next what I'm going to do is add a layer of distortion. And if you want to just do this really quick, you can use the distortion that's here, but I like for it to be separate. So I'm going to come over here, and basically what we're going to do is distort everything that is happening over here by adding a noise texture and a mapping node. We're just going to hook that up right here. And I'm just going to plug the object coordinates into the noise texture over here. That way it's just coming from the center like that. And we're just going to use this to distort the location right here. So now if we look, we can see it's distorting it quite a bit, maybe a little more than it needs to be. I'm just going to reset all the distortion going on just so we can see a little more clearly. And this just looks really crazy right now. It's hard to tell what's going on. So basically what we want to do is add a math node. I'm just going to set this to multiply. And if we set this to 0, it should be like nothing's happening. If we move it very slowly, we can see the distortion happening. But it's also moving up and down. So if you don't want that to happen, if you want a little more control, just add another math node right here before the multiply and set that to subtract and make sure the value is 0. So you can use this to add a little distortion, and that's kind of nice. If you want this to be smoother, you can turn the detail down. You can also set this to 4D and animate the W if you want the pattern to change like this, which I think is a pretty interesting result also. And the way I like to do that is to add a value node right here and type in hash frame, and that will just match the frame number that you're on. So you can see up here, this one right here, when we press the spacebar, it starts changing, and that's the frame number, and that should match this exactly. So we can just plug this directly into the W right here, and it moves really fast. So if you want that to go slower, you can just add a math node set to divide, and the higher you make this number, the slower it will move. So I'll just set this to like 50 or something even slower, like 200, and you can see it's just a very slow changing movement now. And it's not changing the scale, which is nice too. Okay, and the next thing I'm going to do is add some color to this. So I'm just going to turn this back to render view right here. And I'm going to add another noise texture. I'm just going to put this down here. And for this, I'm also going to use the object texture coordinates. So I'm just going to zoom out pretty far. And if you hold Alt and right click, you get this like cheat. I forget what it's called, but it's basically a way to connect things. I use it to connect things from great distances. So basically, I'm just going to go over that reroute node. And if you have the Node Wrangler add-on, I actually use this a lot. You've probably seen me do it. If you hold Alt and right-click, you get this like lazy connect node thing, and you can just hover over the reroute node, Alt right-click, and then go over to your noise texture over here, and it should connect for you. So I'm going to bring this a little closer to our emission and just plug this right in. And I'm also going to add a math node set to greater than. And this is all just a stylistic choice. You can really plug anything you want into here. And I'm going to set this to greater than and just leave it at 0.5. So we can see this is pretty splotchy right now. What I'm going to do is turn the detail all the way up and the roughness all the way up. And this will give us this like kind of dirty, grungy look. So if you see this flickering right here, it's usually because you need more samples in your viewport. So I'm just going to set this to something pretty high, like 128. Yeah, and then if you want to change the two colors that this is using, you can grab in a mix RGB. And this is just two colors right here. So you plug that into the factor, and then whatever two colors you want, you can just use these. So I'm just going to use black and red for this. And the first one, I'm just going to turn the value up quite a bit. And if you want this to have more bloom, since we're using EV, all you have to do is just turn the strength of this emission up right here, and you'll get a result like this. You can change the distribution of those two colors with the greater than node if you wanted it to be darker. You can change this from 3D to 4D, just like we did before, and basically animate it the way we did with the other one. So I could just steal it from that one over here and plug that in. It should start animating on its own now. But it looks a little fast. It's kind of hard to tell in the real-time preview. So I'm going to disconnect that and plug the frame directly in there and add another divide over here. And we can just change the value separately for that. So I'm going to set this to something higher, like 500, and it should distort a little more slowly, this W value. Okay, so now that we have this, you have pretty much all the controls you need to make the animations that I showed you. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy paste so we have that first version unchanged over there. And I'm going to show you how I did those animations. So I'm just going to go back to frame 1, and I'm going to duplicate this material right here. So I'm just going to name this Retro Sun Anim 1 for animation 1. Okay, so I don't want any of this distortion for this one, so I'm just going to turn the multiply down to 0, and we should be left with these even bars right here. And I'm just going to come over here. So on the multiply add that's controlling our greater than, I'm going to set the multiplier to 1 to give us some distortion right here. I want this to start out like perfectly transparent. So basically I'm just going to go on frame 0 and turn add down until everything is black. So this should be about -1. Insert a keyframe. Make sure this is selected so that we see our keyframes over here in our timeline. I'm going to duplicate that and bring it to the end, which in this case is 250 frames. Then I'm going to go halfway, which is 125, and I'm just going to turn the add up until everything is red, which is about 1, or a little over 1. So I'm going to insert a keyframe here, and if we watch the animation now, it warps in from like transparent to completely opaque like that, and then it just goes back. But what I want it to do is make it look like it's like cycling downward. So the way we do this is actually with this value right here. So what I'm going to do is we want it to stay at the same Y location at the very beginning. So I'm going to go to frame 0, insert a keyframe, insert a single keyframe on Y, go to 125 and set that to -1 and insert a keyframe, and I'm just going to duplicate this over like that. And now if we watch it, it's not going to look exactly the way we want, and that's because if we look at the graph editor, what we want is when it gets to the middle and there's no transparency at all, we want it to flip instantly. And make sure you have your mapping selected for this. So select everything, hit T, and change this to constant. And you can see that it should just, as soon as it changes, it's immediate. There's no interpolation. So that's how I got this first animation. So I'm just going to select this one that we made, and I'm going to duplicate it and push it to the side again. And click on this, and I'm going to copy that. So I'm going to rename this to Retro Sun Anim 2. I'm just going to change the Z rotation for our greater than right here, and you can see it's like kind of creating these triangles now, but they're a little smooth on the end. And the reason for that is because our wave texture is set to sine, which is like a smooth interpolation. And we want to set this to triangle, and that should make it spiky. And so if you wanted to, you could set this at 90 degrees so it's straight across like this, or you could set it to like something like 45, where it's like more at an angle. So this isn't really appearing in the right spot anymore, and the reason for that is our Y location is not really in the right spot anymore. Go back to frame 0, and we're going to turn this down a little actually, until everything is black again. So I have it at -0.23 right now. Just going to insert a frame there. Make sure that's highlighted so we can actually see everything. And then go to the center, and let's see if we can get this any closer. It looks like it doesn't really matter. So we can see around frame like 187. It's going right here, and we don't really want that. So I'm just going to move that over right here to about -1.21 and insert a keyframe. And I'm just going to drag that to the center and to the very end right there. So we can see now it should go to the very end until it's completely red, and then when it gets here, once again it just jumps to this other value. You can see right here, there's no interpolation, it just jumps. And then it continues from the other side like that. And I think for these values, we are still using Bezier. And so if you want this to be sharper, you can change this to linear. and it'll seem like more of a constant speed like that. And what's cool about this is if you want this to be distorted, you can just add some distortion right on top of it, like this. I think it's a pretty neat effect. And, you know, a lot of people would probably make a retro sun out of just like modeling, like, you know, with a mesh. But doing it with nodes like this gives you a lot more options, and you can just change things on the fly, and it's not as destructive, which I like. And, you know, you could always come in here and plug whatever texture you want in there, or, you know, change these colors to something else. And if you wanted there to be more colors, you could even, instead of using a greater than and a mix RGB, you could bring in like a color ramp, plug the factor into here, and then the color into the color right there. And you can just add whatever colors you want in here. If you wanted something a little more psychedelic, you could do something like this. I basically just changed this from HSV and set it to far, and both of these flags are red. And then I turned the detail, I turned the roughness down so it's not as grungy. Kind of looks like a heat map or something like that, which is kind of neat. And then I turned the strength down very slightly also. So yeah, you can do a lot of interesting things with this. Yeah, so that's how you do it. And if you want to grab this on Gumroad, I packaged it a little more neatly so that it's in this reusable node, and it should have all the values you need. And if you open it up, everything is organized with frames, so you can just look through and see where everything is if you do want to alter it at all. Thanks for sticking around to the end. If you like this, consider subscribing, and if you make something when you follow this, tag me on Instagram to show me. I like seeing your work. Thanks for watching. See ya.